Group 3, and we'll be discussing lead in Oakland, California. So I'm going to start off with a brief video to give you guys some context to the issue that we're trying to address.
Tonight, tap water in a part of Oakland is getting dangerous to drink, and it's because the amount of lead in the water there is rising. And as Night Beat's Julia Goodrich explains, the problem is becoming worse than in Flint, Michigan.
So for me, I'm extremely concerned.
A health scare where City Councilman Noel Gallo and about 25,000 other families with kids live. The Fruitvale District, area code 94601.
This is where I grew up and I raised my 4 children.
It was one of his children who first alerted him today about this latest Reuters news agency study, showing alarming levels of lead in the Fruitvale area and surrounding neighborhoods, levels higher than those in Flint, Michigan.
You've had warehouses here for forever. And so therefore the contamination, there's some properties where you can't build because the soil contamination is so deep.
That lead comes from years of industrial pollutants, freeways that spewed leaded gasoline fumes well into the 80s, and even more potent source, aging pipes and paint. People were talking about the problem in this story we did 5 years ago.
The density of old houses before 1940s. Lead was used as a pigment in paints for a long time. Every time someone was painting a house and there was scraping off the old paint, those particles would just sort of drift.
In the Fruitvale area, the rate among 500 children tested, more than 7.5%, worse than Flint. Long-term exposure to dangerous lead levels may cause everything from anemia to learning disabilities. Children are particularly vulnerable.
It's disturbing that it wasn't caught earlier.
Asaya is expecting her second child in the new year, and her first child already has health concerns.
My daughter's diabetic, so I want to make sure that she has fresh water.
And what does the public need to do with this information right here and now?
Well, right now it's, for me it's okay, so what do I do? Stop drinking the water altogether? And so I'm waiting for the county and the federal people to step forth and be able to share information with us. What is it that we do next?
In terms of how widespread this is, the toxicity levels were only detected here in the Fruitvale area. No other place in Oakland or in the Bay Area. On the Night Beat, I'm Juliette Goodrich.
Okay, so as mentioned in the video, there was an investigation by the Reuters organization, and they found that 3,000 areas in the United States had lead poisoning rates higher than Flint, Michigan. There are a couple of news articles that I pulled up, so Baltimore, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Philadelphia, and St. Joseph's, Missouri. So, background about our case study. So our location of interest is Fruitvale, Oakland, California, as mentioned in the video. Our population of concern is children, and the total population in Fruitvale is 419,278, and then 6% of that is children. So the main problem in Fruitvale, Oakland is that 90% of the homes were built prior to 1978, which was when the federal government banned lead. In the study, there were 500 children tested for blood lead, and 7.57% had elevated blood lead levels, which is higher than the exposure in Flint, Michigan, which was 5%, and the nationwide average, which is 2.5%. And then in 2016, 152,000 children in California were tested for blood lead, and more than 2,000 children had blood lead levels between 5 and 9. And 393 had higher.
So why is lead as a hazard of concern? That is because of in the past 3 centuries there has been a 1,000-fold increase in exposure. Children are more concerned than adults due to the fact that they can absorb more and retain more. It's said that about 50% of the lead they ingest is absorbed, and adults are also able to clear more rather than children. In terms of the outcomes of concern, it is related to whether there's a high lead exposure or a low lead exposure. With high lead exposure, outcomes are kidney damage, brain damage, and in some cases mortality, while in low cases of lead exposure, there is a development of lower IQ in general. The different types of exposure or routes of exposure involve inhalation and ingestion. Some sources of lead in our community are lead paint, as mentioned, Cindor, which is a cosmetic additive, candy and toys. You may be asking whether there is a safe threshold for lead. So there was at different points in time. So it used to be 60 micrograms per deciliter, then it went to 25, 10, and at this point there is a 5 microgram per deciliter reference value set by the EPA.
So as far as current regulations go, we wanted to compare what it would look like on the international level versus the federal and the state local level. So at the international level, there's two main regulations that we identified. One was through UNEP and the other through WHO. So UNEP came up with a guideline for the lead limit for concentration limit for lead in paint, and then WHO established a lead limit for drinking water. At the federal level, there is the Clean Air Act, which we've talked a lot about, which established the primary and secondary limits for lead in the air, and that's currently set at 0.15 micrograms per meter cube, and that was revised from the previous one, which was at 1.5, so they reduced it by 10 times in order to make the air safer. There's also the Toxic Substance and Control Act, which currently has standards for lead in soil and in dust, depending on whether the soil is in a play area where children frequent, or if it's in just a regular soil in the rest of the yard. And then for dust, the limit changes depending on whether it's on the floor or in the sill. And then specifically in California, there's the Childhood Lead Poisoning and Prevention Act, which established mandatory screening guidelines for children so that they can get regular lead level screenings. There also is regulation to protect lead levels in schools to protect children, as well as enforcing limits, things like toys, candy, jewelry, and the pipes that go to either the schools or different places in the community. And then what's also interesting, in California, there's a state law that requires health insurance plans that operate in that state to require coverage for blood level screenings.
Okay, so how is blood level detected? So the normal way that I'm sure all of you heard of is blood levels detection. And that's when you take like a venous or a capillary blood draw, and the detection is usually between 2 to 5. I don't know the rest of it there. The CDC and EPA as well also has reference dose of 5 grams per deciliter, which is when children are required to be detected. So the pros to this has been used literally for decades. It's the most common metric for children, and it can assess recent exposures. But it's still a blood draw, it's still invasive, and it can determine long-term chronic effects and sources of lead damage. So another one is actually X-ray fluorescence. So there's actually a picture of that up there. So this is like the tibia and fibula bone. So the white strips that you see there are actually lead exposure, and this is long-term lead exposure, which is actually one of the benefits of this kind of technology. The machine tends to be pretty portable, it's easy to operate, the results are pretty quick. There's no laboratory analysis, and there's like a good safety design. It's not like radiation exposure, but at the same time, it's not as accurate as blood levels, and short-term exposure.
So the source to effect breathing. So based on our case study, our source or primary source is lead paint in the homes. As I mentioned before, 90% of them were built prior to 1978. The effect, as we have learned in class, from lead exposure is decrease in neurological, cognitive, and developmental deficiencies. Some upstream factors, as I mentioned, the houses were built prior to 1978, and then currently there's low funding for news coverage. They had a lead abatement program, but it got canceled because they didn't have enough funding and it wasn't helping. And then so our intervention is gonna focus on that, so lead remediation in short term.
So we have like another video that we
According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, 1 in every 4 American homes contains significant lead-based paint hazards. When the paint deteriorates, it frees chips and dust to contaminate everything in the area. Those most at risk are children.
A child under the age of 6 exposed to lead absorbs it at twice the rate as an adult. And so it affects the nervous system and it may be detrimental to their learning capabilities in the future.
This lead abatement team in Los Angeles, California, is among many nationwide addressing the problem. Its job is to remove the lead that until 1978 was added to paint to reduce corrosion and as a pigment to increase brightness. The team's target today is the house's exterior. The interior work will follow, but first a specialist must determine how much lead the paint there contains. His X-ray fluorescence lead paint analyzer, or XRF, measures the milligrams of lead paint per square centimeter, even if several lead-free paint layers are covering it. In LA County, an XRF reading higher than 0.7 is considered a lead paint hazard.
And here we have a ceiling, it's damaged, the paint is damaged, it's chipping, peeling, has some mold damage. The reading is 9.6, that has a significant amount of lead in it and should be treated. One of the major areas of concern for lead-based paint hazards are friction areas, such as window sashes rubbing up against window jambs, window sills. That friction creates a fine dust that children can get their hands on. Hands can go in the mouth and they ingest the lead that way. And this one is not in the greatest shape, and it's, and has a significant amount of lead in it.
Outside, the abatement team removes the lead paint on the house's exterior using only water and scrapers.
We spray it down to keep the dust particles down. We're not allowed to do any mechanical sanding because of the amount of dust that gets created. So pretty much everything has to be manually sprayed on a house like this.
Once the scraping is complete, a vacuum sucks up the paint chips and dust for proper disposal. To contain the remaining lead paint that can't be scraped away, the crew sprays on a special coating called encapsulant.
It bonds to the lead molecules. It has a 20-year lifespan, and it has something else called bittermite in it. And it gives it a bitter taste, so if a child wants to fight or finds a flake or have that bittermite in it, it'll give them a sour aftertaste. The taste will probably stay with them for about 2 to 3 days, so they'll know not to eat that again.
Lead-based paint removal from houses is an ongoing effort, but a significant amount of it.
So, as was mentioned, we will be instituting a similar lead abatement technique that was instituted in Los Angeles, but now in our Fruitvale region. So again, to outline the steps, first they'll be using an XRF machine to measure if lead levels are greater than 0.7 milligrams per centimeter squared. Then, as was mentioned, they'll be using manually scraping methods to kind of keep down the dust particles that would obviously contain lead. So this is through water, vacuuming it up, respraying with that encapsulate paint, which contains bittermite, so kind of a 2-for-1 kind of deal with mitigating child exposure. And then obviously all the houses will be cleared of lead exposure, which is the end result and goal. Thank you, Bill Gates, who has given us a seal of approval for this invention.
So we already know about the hierarchy of controls. We want to kind of go through the different levels and show you how different aspects of our intervention fall within the different levels of the hierarchy, starting with elimination of the hazards. So the point of the abatement is to take the lead paint out of the homes. So that would be fulfilling that requirement of eliminating the hazard altogether. As far as engineering controls go, as you saw in the video, vacuuming the paint chips and then also applying the encapsulant with the bittermite to reduce any future exposure. would help to reduce any further dust generation that would expose either the homeowners or the neighbors. And then also you saw the workers wearing PPE, wearing respirators, and also making systems to protect themselves while doing the maintenance process.
Okay, so the interesting thing is this is not the first time it's been tried. It's actually been tried in Brooklyn City. So like New Haven, Connecticut created a program like this back in 1995. And so they've done 1,300 lead abatement procedures in their homes. And while we can't say correlation equals causation, this is actually a pretty significant lead level drop that we saw in children. So in 1995, there was 400 plus children that had over 20 grams per deciliter of lead. And in 2014, it was 107. And you see an even lower metric, their highest metric hasn't changed, 10 microliters per deciliter. So something significant is happening with this kind of intervention. So it gave us a lot of confidence. However, we should just kind of warn you that this should be done in every home. It has to be before 1978 because that is when lead paint was used in homes. There also needs to be a risk assessment that needs to be carried out by a professional, certified professional, because not every home would benefit by this procedure. You could be doing more harm than good. So homes that are kind of falling apart, exposed lead paint, these are the homes that we need to use. And then the tenants have to leave their house for several days. It can take up to a week to do this. That's going to be a consideration that needs to be addressed. That's it. Questions?
This is a free service offered for the people.
From what I've seen in the literature, HUD, Department of Urban Housing and Development, do give grants. At least that's how it works in the New Haven program. And I think each one is something like $7,000 to $9,000 per house. So it is significant. So you actually do need funding. But according to that program, the landowners were able to do that for free, more or less, using their government money. So it was a really good procedure for them.
Also, previously, something like this existed in Oakland, but the issue was that they ran out of money. But when they did have a program, they had an income requirement too. So if a family was a certain percentage below the poverty level, then they would be eligible to participate in the program. So going forward, we want to make this open to all families that need it, so it's more accessible. And so we want to start the program back up and also open it up to everybody so that we can make sure that it's this.
It seems like it highlighted contaminated drinking water. Did you all find that? Well, did they say that lead paint was the larger source of blood levels in people there?
Yeah, there was some evidence of drinking water exposure, but we didn't find a lot of it. It was mainly the lead paint and the lead dust that was significant.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there were issues with some of their pipes or anything.
Not as much. I was seeing a few studies that was mainly mainly news articles and stuff like that. So it wasn't certain validity, but it was the lead paint stuff was really solid and seemed to be nice. Well, in that particular study, that's why I was a little hesitant because it looked like it was mainly associated. They were putting this information into grants, into the governmental website, so it seemed to have a lot of good validity, but I couldn't quite find a direct causality to it. So it could have been several other factors going on. Maybe there were other ways that lead was getting pulled from the children's environment. So, but because I would imagine lead abatement having an effect with just such a large magnitude.
Well, no, what I was asking is more, how did they determine when a house needed remediation? Was it based on the concentration of lead in the paint, or samples from the children of how much lead they had?
Based on the house, and it tended to be a bit of a complicated procedure. Some of it was the threshold limit we were talking about with the XRF gun. Some of it was how much it was exposed, but you needed a professional to assess it because there was different levels to it. So.
And that makes sense because then if they sold the house, then somebody else with a child might live there. So yeah. All right, well, let's thank group 3.